Today, I'd like to continue along the same theme from yesterday. Yesterday, the focus of the talk was I was giving you my perspective on a few different ways to think about aims, goals, purposes of Dharma practice. And of course, it's not for me or anyone to tell you what your own aim and goals should be. So I offered my own perspective about that, and with the hope, the intention that whatever decisions each of us come to, I hope we would at least reflect upon, consider Dharma teachings, and see if those can help influence decisions we make about how we want to live our lives, where we want to put the emphasis of what we do and how we spend our time, and just let it at least influence us. And then, of course, we each make our own choices on how to move forward from there. And having said that, the way I ended with it was really about trying to elucidate or just go into more depth about this phrase we often hear, liberation through non-clinging. And so what do we really mean by that? And that's what time was spent on yesterday. And then I said, if I had to sum it up in one word that I like, it was equanimity. And so then we left off yesterday by talking a little bit about the need then to have formal practices, trainings of our hearts and minds. That's really what we're doing on this retreat. Dharma, I use the term Dharma practice, which for me it comprises more than just meditation. The formal meditation is a big, big part of the mental training, but it involves all aspects of life, just as we move about in our daily lives and bump up against, come into contact with all the experiences. And then we get to see where the places where we can rest in the stream of non-clinging and with our hearts open, and where are the places we fall into reactivity, negativity, into some kind of, hearts close off, we fall into some kind of difficulty. And then that can be a real learning edge for us right there, just as powerful, maybe more powerful than the formal meditations. But we need some kind of trainings because we all know that the habits of mind run deep, and we can each look for ourselves at where all the ways in which our minds serve us well, our conditioned patterns work well, and where are the areas where we create suffering for ourselves and for others. And those are some areas that we can work on and do. This is the place of the training. And then I mentioned, and I ended yesterday mentioning with what I call the building blocks of, at least in our tradition, of any meditation practice. You know, there's so many techniques and methods, practices out there, but I think they pretty much all comprise some combination of these fundamental building blocks. Mindfulness. Today, I'm going to focus on concentration. Then there's insight, and then also all the qualities of the heart. We use the term loving kindness. I personally just like the word love. Loving kindness is a fine word too, but compassion, empathy, all these qualities of the heart. So all of these are the foundational, what I call the building blocks of meditation. So today as I said, I'm going to focus on the concentration piece and really spend time exploring, because it's understood, and it's actually kind of a confusing world out there. If you don't know, it's a big world, and you hear so many different conflicting teachings and paths and practices. And then tomorrow, I think we'll move into talking on the insight side of the practice. And then finally, we'll see how the time goes, either tomorrow or into the next talk, about how these all come together and the ways they can work together, whether we tend to emphasize just concentration practices or just insight, or in a way like here, I'm hoping that we can find a way where they actually integrate and synthesize as one path. So the word that often gets translated as concentration is samadhi. And that is both the Pali and the Sanskrit word samadhi. I actually don't like the word concentration at all because it has so many different connotations, but we're stuck with it because everybody uses it. So I will continue to use the term concentration, but we need to just, it's fine as long as we understand what we mean. The word samadhi itself, it really has the sense of the mind collecting or coming together. And if I had to pick one word that I like better than concentration, I would use the term undistracted. Concentrated mind is an undistracted mind. Well, it turns out that there's more than one way or one flavor of an undistracted mind. It's not just one way. So I want to start by naming two main ways in which the mind can be undistracted. Some of you have heard this because I give this talk. Most retreats, I'll do at least this one talk on samadhi. So some of you I know have heard this before, but it's very, very important to understand. So let me just pause here on this, on these different ways an undistracted mind can manifest. So if you picked any practice, any technique, let's just take mindfulness of breathing, for example, but it could be anything. And you keep working, putting your attention, your mindfulness. So the mindfulness is already in here, that component, and we're being mindful of breathing. And when your mind wanders away, you keep coming back and reconnecting over and over with the breathing. Your mind will become more trained, and over time you will be more skilled. You'll naturally be better. It'll be easier for you to stay with your breath. Your mind won't be jumping all over the place so much. You won't be, anyway, you'll naturally be able to stay more steady and present. The undistractedness is growing, right? You're just staying with the one. Your mind can feel more settled, calm, less distracted. If you were to stay with that, and if you were to take it far enough, I mean, really very, very far, you could get to a place where you were so good at staying on the one. Sometimes we say being one pointed. It's not literally a point, but it's just a way of speaking. You could become one pointed. You'll hear that term, staying on the one thing, the breath, that your mind will hardly ever wander off. And it's actually requires very, very little effort or no effort to stay with that. And if you kept going with it, you could take it, you can get to a place where the mind can become so undistracted on the one thing that it actually stops even noticing other experiences around it. You could be so undistracted on the breath, say, that you wouldn't even notice sounds around you or what's going on in your body. For you, other experiences would drop away. You would lose connection with them. And in your awareness would just be, there's more in the experience that I'll bring in a few moments, but it'll just be on one thing. And an analogy I always use, it's kind of silly, but I think it kind of makes the point. It's like, you're at home and somebody likes to read I don't know if people read newspapers anymore. I still do. I like to do that, but maybe that's just giving away my age. But, you pull out the Sunday paper, the New York Times, that's what I like to read, and reading the paper. And maybe someone else comes in and they say, "Hey, Richard," I don't even notice them because I'm engrossed in what I'm doing here. I don't even notice. And finally they say, Richard. I go, "Oh, what? I'm sorry. What was that?" That's kind of getting the idea where you can become engrossed in something and you stop noticing I wasn't noticing the person calling my name. So that's trying to get to the idea that we can become engrossed in or undistracted on the one thing. And so again, that's taking it very far to the extreme. If you could get to the point where literally the mind is totally undistracted. And we one of the things we say is we talk about the mind stopping. Now I need to pause for a moment because I notice that I'm using the term the mind. And so I want to say that I don't know what the mind is. I'm using the term, I realize I'm being sloppy and I'm using the mind, and there's actually different aspects to what we call the mind. So I hope that will be okay, because I keep talking the mind does this and the mind does that. So let me just name that I realize I'm doing that, but I think hopefully what we want to get at will become clear and it'll be okay to speak in that way. So if you were to go in this direction that I'm talking about, the terms you'll use sometimes are one-pointed. I mentioned that earlier because your attention has come just narrowed down to one thing or one point. So we call that one-pointed concentration. This is traditional language. It's also called exclusive concentration. You'll hear this term. It's exclusive because you're exclusively on the one thing and you've excluded awareness of everything else. And it's a kind of stopping because I don't know what's actually going on. I'm not a neuroscientist, so what's actually going on in the brain, but experientially, your experience of changing phenomena stops. You don't feel, if you took it all the way, your experience, you just can't feel, you just lose connection with the body and your breathing. It's just not in your awareness. And maybe as I'm going to get to in a few minutes about some of the accompanying experiences that come with deepening samadhi. Some people see lights, feel bliss. More about that in a few minutes. Well, maybe for you, it's nothing but just pure light and bliss. And there's nothing else, no thoughts, nothing. And if that happens, you won't be complaining. It's really, really pleasant and it feels good, right? So it's not weird or anything. It's just, it might sound a little getting out there, but again, you won't complain if that happens. So that's one style of undistractedness and one style of the mind stopping. Exclusive, one-pointedness. Well, there's a whole other way that undistractedness can manifest. And it's just as deep as the way I just spoke about, but it's qualitatively different. In this second way, the mind also comes to, there's a stopping that happens, but it's a different kind of stopping. Rather than the flow of changing experience stops for you, the mind itself comes to stillness and stops, but it doesn't lose awareness with changing flow of experience. There's a stillness, a steadiness, a complete undistractedness. Your mind still will never waver. It's just present and clear, but you can still feel the experience of the body can still come and go, for example. It hasn't shut off the connection with change. And the way I like to think about this is, I wish I had my quote book here, but I think I can remember the famous Ajahn Chah quote. Some of you have heard this many times about the still forest pool, that I think captures the essence of the second kind of stopping. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but I think this is close enough. He says, make your mind like a still forest pool. He says, I wish I could remember. He says, basically, many wonderful, you'll see many things come and go. Many wonderful animals will come and drink at the pool. Many things you'll see come and go. but you will be still. That's what he's talking about there. So in this second kind of undistractedness, and these are concepts if you haven't experienced them, rather than calling it exclusive concentration, I call it inclusive concentration because it doesn't exclude anything. Instead of one-pointedness, the word in Pali, you don't need to know the Pali, but if you're interested, it's called ekagata. The eka means one. Also translated one is singleness of mind, one-pointedness, sometimes unification, unification of mind. I call it unification of mind because there is a feeling of the mind. It's hard to explain, but like the mind coming together, collecting in this gathering together, this undistractedness, pure presence of mind. Equally present, steady, clear as the exclusive concentration. And so I call it inclusive, I call it unification of mind. And the way I think about it, again, I don't know what's actually going on in the brain, but just so this may not, what I'm about to say may not be technically accurate, but I think it'll make a point. Whatever parts of the brain are functioning to bring your mind, well, let me back up. I'll come back to that. I won't forget, just a moment. Think for yourself, for those of you who are, maybe you're not brand new meditators and you've been, if you've ever had any taste of your mind starting to become a little more steady and calm in meditation, some of you either through your daily life practice or having done retreats have gotten very, very concentrated, and you know this, but even just a light touch, the samadhi starts to grow when you settle more. You know the experience of your mind being more present, less distracted, clear, right? It's calming down, settling down. That's the samadhi we're talking about. And if you have those experiences, I think most people, maybe all of you have, again, I don't know everyone's experience on this retreat, you may notice that you don't actually lose as you get more concentrated. It doesn't have to be this narrowing of awareness. It can actually be a broadening and opening of awareness. You may be more aware than ever of whatever goes on in your body and your mind on ever subtler levels because you're more present. You're not less connected from changing experience. Many of you will find that you become more than connected with changing experience than ever if this happens to you. Now, this is something I'm happy to do interviews and talk with you one-on-one personally about more about. But for now, I'm just trying to convey the sense that there's these two kinds of undistracted. Going back to what I was going to say about the brain, that part of the brain functioning, let's just say, if there is such a thing, that settles your mind and steadies it, and it comes to stillness, clarity, presence, wakefulness, all of these qualities that come together in the samadhi. It's the same on either kind of concentration. In the exclusive kind, along with that, the other brain centers that give rise to conscious awareness of changing experience in your body, thoughts, mind, they also come to quiescence. Whereas in the inclusive kind, those are left alone. They can still function, but we allow them. Underneath it all, there's an undistracted presence, if you will. It turns out everything else does settle out too. It gets subtler and subtler. I'll come back to that in a bit. Right? So for now, I'm kind of going on and on repeating, but I just want to convey these two kinds of inclusive and exclusive samadhis. Now, if you're meditating on your own, you never read a book, you never talked to any teachers, you never got any feedback, and you just stayed with your breathing, on its own, you would tend to go in one of these two directions naturally. People are different. Most people naturally tend to go to this inclusive kind on their own. However, some people do naturally on their own go to the exclusive kind. It's just the way our minds happen to, I can't say why. So not only do we have a natural inclination or propensity to go in one direction or another, but we can steer it in either direction too. And this is why we want to know that there's these differences, because you might be heading in one direction, and by the way, there's not a right or wrong on any of this. This will get into controversies around samadhi that I want to say a little bit about either tonight or in the next few days, but I will bring in some of the things about why people think concentration. I'll actually get to it a little tonight about why some people who think you should be doing a kind of practice called insight meditation. That's the real enlightenment practice, according to that school. And if you're doing concentration, you can't do insight. I'll come to that. But depending on what you think, you may want to steer in a particular direction. So if you're going in a direction and you're going to inclusive and you want to go to exclusive or vice versa, I'm not going to get into the techniques right now. It's more of getting into the details of practice. But I can talk to you about it because it's not hard to do, to steer it. It's actually, if you know what to do, it's pretty simple. So, but just to know, all of these different options are available, and it's a big world out there. So the important thing, though, is we want the mind to be able to, just to be more present and steady. Now, here's another thing that's important to be aware of. In addition to the actual settling and undistractedness of the mind itself, there's, along with it goes a huge range of other experiences that are part of the state of samadhi in meditation. And I just want to name some of the kind of common ways, and it's actually you probably couldn't name all because it's so individual of how samadhi unfolds. So along with the undistractedness, some people, it starts to feel very pleasant for some people. Some people feel a sense of calm, stillness, and peace that can be quite palpable. Some people start to feel a sense of expansiveness, and it can be, it's hard to describe if you haven't experienced it, but you just feel expansive. And I remember going through a phase where I would feel this expansiveness in my body. And it literally felt like sometimes I would sit with my hands kind of in my lap and sometimes out on my knees. And I remember sitting with my hands on my knees. And I swear to you, it felt like each of my hands must have been like 3 or 4 feet across. And I'm sitting with my eyes closed. I just knew that they didn't actually, some weird samadhi thing didn't happen. They weren't really 3 or 4 feet across. It was so clear. I had to open my eyes and look, and it'd be, wow, it's the weirdest thing. And then I'd close my eyes and there they are again, 3 or 4 feet. So you can have these kind of in the body expansiveness, doesn't have to, but this is part of what can happen. The mind, you can just feel so spacious and expansive. So expanded, calm, peaceful. And then the pleasantness can get very light or very strong. And you can feel it as in the body, literally physical embodied sensations that can be, sometimes it's just a general glow of pleasantness, or it can actually feel like energies are moving in the body. Sometimes the pleasantness doesn't have to feel like energy's moving, but it can. Sometimes it's more mental. It's hard to know where it's located, but it's just the pleasantness of the mind can happen. And these can get very strong. In fact, you can get into states. You'll often hear the term, people use bliss a lot. And I'll say something about that. It's the word in Pali is piti, P-I-T-I, but they're long vowels, piti, and translated sometimes as bliss. But that, it varies. For some people, that piti can be very intense. And for some people, it can be very light and sweet and just a very light touch. And it never gets super intense. Actually, and sometimes we can get these energies moving in the body, and this piti, or the energies moving, can be, again, it can be very pleasant. They can actually be unpleasant. It can be too much. It's sort of like if you accidentally touched like a electric, where there's, got shocked, or it can actually feel too much. I don't know if it's quite like that, but just to give you the idea. And you want to learn this, a whole part of it. We need to learn how to smooth it out and bring it down. And so that's a whole piece of, if those things happen, I don't know how many people it happens to, but it can. And so that all can be worked with. It's not hard to do, but you just need, how do we smooth that out? And so bring it into the area where it's not kind of frying our nervous systems, but I don't want to say it like that because I don't want to scare you, but it's not like that, but just where it's smoothed out. Some people start to hear sounds, and they'll even report like heavenly or celestial sounds and bells. Probably most people don't, but some do. Some people start to see light. Images, visual images can come, or just colors or lights, whether it's kind of diffuse, or some people will see a very distinct, almost like there's a disc in front of them and it's a mental image. But just like I said, sometimes I felt like my hands were so big. Sometimes people will have to open their eyes and see, is someone actually shining a light? But it's a mental, it can be so vivid. I'm just naming a lot of these things because it's not like you're supposed to have any of these experiences. Nobody has all these experiences. Probably most people don't see lights or hear sounds, so don't go chasing after it. I'd say the most common experience of people is they tend to get more still feeling, calmer, a good, pleasant feeling, maybe a little bit of an expansiveness. And the quality of awareness brightens a lot. And this really, so let me say this, people can get caught up a lot in all these other experiences, the bliss, the light, and that's kind of what we want. Yeah, this feels good. And that's fine. It actually has a place. It's just what happens. But it also has a place in helping draw us deeper in. We want to go into it. And so that can be powerful and useful to work with. So it's not like we have to, you'll hear teachers say, no, don't do concentration practice. You're going to get attached to the bliss. You'll hear that warning a lot. The Buddha was not one of those people, by the way. The Buddha explicitly, I don't have the quote right here. Do I have it? No, I don't. But he explicitly said that the bliss, the good feelings that come with this should not be avoided. They shouldn't be feared. And he's quoted as saying, he basically said, go for it. He said it should be cultivated, it should be pursued. So I understand where some of the teachers are coming from, and this will get into the piece again. I'm just it's a little teaser to just hold on. I will get there, of why people may think doing concentration practices takes away from insight meditation. But that's kind of the fear. But it's kind of, I don't really get it, because the Buddha definitely was a big proponent of, if you read the Pali texts, it's not just hidden away in a corner somewhere. You cannot avoid the frequency of talking about, emphasizing these states of samadhi. In particular, there's some states called jhana, which is a very deep state of samadhi, which I'll mention in just a few minutes, what that means, what that is, if you've heard that term. So people say, oh, you're going to get attached. You know what? People do get attached, actually. It's all right. These states of samadhi feel great. Who wouldn't want to feel good like that? It's okay. This is important. This is just me, as in the Buddha or anything. I say you can want it. Well, actually, that is the Buddha. You can go for it. You can strive for it. The trick is, how do we wholeheartedly, seriously give ourselves over to really deepen and cultivate these wholesome states of clarity and of mind without making it an object of grasping and clinging? That's all. We can give ourselves over, dedicate ourselves to it. And if you fall into grasping and clinging, everybody does, we'll pull you out. It's no big deal. You'll pull yourself out. And if you don't, you'll suffer. I can't tell you how many retreats. It took me I'm a tough case, so it took me a long time to learn. I I remember I think I mentioned I went yesterday. I was on with set in this like 1 year long retreat, and I'd been into jhana before. I'd already been meditating, I don't know, like 30 years before I even had gone into this long retreat. So I kind of, I thought, oh, I'm the big meditator. I know. Show you how defiled my mind can be. And had it all planned out. I'd gotten into jhana in maybe a month to 6 weeks on retreat. That's about how long it would take me. So I thought, well, this is going to be great. 1 month, 6 weeks, I'm going to be in jhana. And then it's just going to deepen in all these states of profound liberation. After that, I don't have a time limit on me. It's going to be fantastic. So meditating 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, no jhana. The retreat was going fine, right? But no jhana. So I went to the teacher in tears about how my retreat's falling apart. And the teacher kindly said, well, the deeper states of realization and liberation, they don't come from attaining anything in particular. It's all about non-clinging to whatever is arising. And I think I said something like, well, yes, that's true, but in order to deeply realize that fact, I've got to get whatever. So I proceeded to suffer for a while, and it took time. In time, everything that needs to come does come. And these meditative states, I don't want to diminish them. I do think they're a big deal, but they're both a big deal and of no importance at all at the same time. Of course, we want to cultivate stages of clarity of mind and peace and presence, as opposed to having our minds scattered all over the place. But the real essence of the practice is it doesn't matter. And we need to convince that part of our minds that it doesn't matter. What does matter is how we work with whatever it is that's happening. And that includes all the times when we can't concentrate and we think it's falling apart. And we only think it's falling apart because we have some idea how it's supposed to be, and it's something different. And so during the times when you can't concentrate or it's hard to sit, those are tremendous learning opportunities. And we want to learn to teach, well, how do I let go of my suffering around this? Right now is what I need in the moment. And those are not just Dharma cliches. It's literally true. Working skillfully with what we have, whatever it is the whole practice. Even if we never really get much concentration at all, it's of no consequence at all, because these states come and go, right? So a few more things just about the state of samadhi itself. One is that I mentioned a few minutes ago that there's sort of two aspects to what we've been talking about. One is the undistracted mind itself, and then there's all the other stuff, the other experiences, the bliss, the lights, the peace, the expanded mind and everything. They're both important, but we want to not get so caught up and engrossed with all what we call the good stuff, the pleasant, that we lose connection with the actual clarity of mind itself. And one of the images I use often that I think works is when this is what I think the real power of the samadhi is. Just by staying with the one method or technique, say the mindfulness of breathing, and letting it take us deeper, the mind, if you've noticed for yourself, getting even a little more concentrated and settled, sometimes the mind can feel a lot more clear. And ultimately, I like to say it's like the mind turns into either an electron microscope or the opposite, a Hubble telescope. And I think both images work, and it can feel like one or the other sometimes. That's the power of perception that then comes to meet when we want to go back to the Four Noble Truths. What is suffering? What's its cause? What are the patterns within us, the forces? We really come to penetrate that very deeply, intimately, through the samadhi part of the practice. So just from time to time, if you remember, don't stir yourself up or drive yourself crazy. But if and when, your concentration is really strong, or even a little bit, yes, you'll have all the samadhi experiences, your own unique unfolding or manifestation, but you want to then check in and check in, how's the clarity of my mind? And just notice and appreciate how it can be, right? So we just are aware of that, because that's a big piece of the power of it. So one more thing just about the experience of samadhi, and then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how mostly the how-to part is in the instructions in the morning, but I want to say a little bit about, on the practice side, what can lead us into deeper samadhi. And then I also want to say something about, well, if you're in strong samadhi, what do you do then? How do you use being in those spaces? And then that will lead into tomorrow talking more on the insight side. I want to do the same thing I'm doing tonight, really go through a range of ways that insight and insight meditation is understood and practiced. And so we'll get into that. And I think this will lead into that. I just want to briefly say something about meditative states called jhana. It's just part of maybe being complete in a discussion on samadhi. The word jhana, Jhana, in Pali, it actually just means to meditate. And there are actually a few places in the suttas where there are actually some wrong jhanas. When in the story of the Buddha, before he attained his enlightenment, he did 6 years of intensive ascetic practices. And it said he did all, in India, they were doing all kinds of crazy things. He would eat very little, and it said he practically killed himself, starved himself. And sometimes you'll see a statue of a Buddha, whereas he looks like a skeleton, his rib cage. He was so emaciated. That's the ascetic Buddha. And it said he realized that was the middle way. When he gave his first talk on setting in motion the wheel of the Dharma, he talked about the middle way, and then he gave the talk on the Four Noble Truths. The middle way between the extremes of asceticism on one end and overindulgence and sense pleasures on the other. It's a balance, right? So the story when the Buddha was talking about is recorded as speaking about himself during those ascetic yoga years. And he said he used to do a breathingless jhana, where he would hold his breath for really, really long periods of time. I'm not sure what the point was, or self-mortification, or so, I don't know. So the term jhana, there's a few places where it pops up, but almost always the term, just to be aware that it can be like that, but almost always the term jhana means these particular samadhi states. And in the text, there's actually 4 jhanas laid out. They call them the first, second, third, and fourth jhana. And there's a whole definition of them. Some of you, you don't need to buy my book, but some of you know my first book called The Experience of Samadhi, which goes through the texts, also has interviews with a lot of meditation teachers. And I go in a lot of detail about that. So, there's other free things online you can get if you want to get the definitions of the jhanas in more depth. So it's laid out in a lot of, anyway, so these meditative states. And by the way, the word jhana in Pali, in Sanskrit, and my pronunciation is not so great, is dhyana in Sanskrit, which in Chinese is Chan Buddhism. In Japanese is Zen. So Zen, there's lots of schools of Zen, of course, but really the word Zen is the jhana school of Buddhism, actually, but they get away from jhanas in there a lot. But it's this word jhana is important. So it's a particular stages of meditation. It's a big world out there, and a lot of disagreement, and this is beyond the scope of this retreat, on what is real jhana and what is not jhana. And there's jhana wars out there, not literal, but I mean kind of, and people disparaging each other and who's right and wrong and all this. And part of the reason for that is if you look at by definition, jhana is any experience that matches the words in the Pali text. There's stock phrases, one sentence for each jhana. Describes the first jhana, second, third, and the fourth. About half the time that those stock definitions is accompanied by similes, which go into more detail to describe the jhana similes, the state. So any meditative state that matches those words can legitimately be called jhana. It turns out there are a lot of different experiences in meditative states that, because it's hard to put experience into words, that match onto those words. So we don't have to make people right or wrong. A lot of people, there's a range of depths of concentration, a range of, some people think it's more the exclusive concentration part. Some people think it should be more the inclusive concentration part. I know, I won't get into it here, but I'm familiar with, that's part of my book also, if you're interested, gets into where these two, there's actually two different jhana systems in the Pali texts. One uses the exclusive samadhi and one is the inclusive samadhi. So it's a big world out there. And again, it's not a right or wrong, but it's finding our own way that we're drawn to and want to work best for each of us. I'm going to give you my own definition of jhana. This is me, okay? Because, well, first let me back up. You may be aware, some of you know that there's all these lists in Buddhism, and one of the lists is called the Four Imponderables. And there are four things that the Buddha is quoted as listing as saying, the human mind cannot figure this out. Don't even try. And if you do, it's going to kind of blow your mind. So it's not a good thing to even try. And I'll tell you what they are just for completeness. One of them is the mind of a Buddha. One of them is how did existence even begin to come into existence, right? That's kind of one of these like astrophysical, philosophical things. He said, forget it. One of them is the workings of karma, not the principle of karma, but just if you believe in innumerable lifetimes and just the complex web of interbeing, it's just so complex. Don't try to figure it out. Again, not the principle, but just all the forces that are there. It's like, anyway, it's like if it doesn't mean like if you steal someone's ball, then someone's going to steal your ball. I don't think it's, don't try to figure all that out. The fourth, I don't know what order they come in, is the range of experiences possible in jhana is actually an imponderable on that level. So that gives you an idea. And so if you ever, some of you, I don't know if you're meditation teachers yourself or if you ever end up in that role, but one of the real gifts of that is most people don't have that much opportunity to really see and share. I wish there was more opportunities for people, what other people's experiences are. People tend not to talk about it a lot. I don't know what that's all about really, and so if you end up in the teacher role, you get to really see the range of, and it's a big world out there. So because it can be so different, I have my own list of 3 qualities that I think all jhanas share in common. And so I'll just share that with you. So we were talking about undistractedness. So as your mind gets more and more concentrated, you will notice, forgetting jhana, but you just notice that the mind wanders less often. It's more naturally present. You don't have to work so hard, right? And the sense of clarity of mind just strengthens. Well, that settling of the mind keeps strengthening, and it gets to the point, you can get to the point where your mind hardly will wander at all. And if it does, it just barely goes and you're back. And that can go further until finally the mind just, and when you're in jhana, the mind cannot move from its undistractedness for even a split second. There's not even an impulse to move away. It's that steady. Along with that is an effortlessness, so that, again, you know that as the samadhi deepens, we don't have to work as hard. Maybe that's a clumsy way to say it, but we don't have to put in as much effort in the meditation, because the samadhi is doing some of the work for us, keeping us present with the breath. It's not so hard to do. It gets easier and easier. Well, along with getting to the point in jhana where the mind no longer, it can move and be distracted. It can still move. It's hard to explain. The mind can be undistracted, but there's another part of the mind that still can go, well, it's not verbal, but I'll say it in words. It's sort of like, oh, what's this? Or let me check that out. You can incline your mind to move. You can choose to get up if you want. There is a part of the mind that still can move. What is there, like 2 minds in there? I don't know, but you have to experience it if you haven't. Mind's undistracted, and it's deeply, profoundly lack of any sense of doing anything. It's self-sustaining, completely so, on its own, as long as you're in jhana, undistracted. And just, instead of you doing it, it's doing you, taking you. And so that's it. Undistracted, self-sustaining, and that clarity of mind, like becoming a Hubble telescope or a electron microscope, just gets very powerful. And it's really quite astounding when it happens. It's like the level of clarity. So those 3 are what I would say would go with any of the jhana systems. So I'm going to leave that now, that for that. I think that was a little quick whirlwind tour through samadhi, but I hope it gave you the basic idea. If you take away nothing from what I'm going to say a little bit more, but from what I've said so far, the main 2 things are these 2 kinds of inclusive or exclusive samadhi. And again, if you need to talk with me offline in more about it, I'm happy to. You can let me know. If there's 2 kinds, and also keeping in mind that there can be all these pleasant experiences, and there's the actual just clarity of mind itself. And so we want to not lose touch with that if we get all engrossed and happy that we're having bliss or something like that. So we just have a little bit of time. I want to just say a few things on how do we move into and through stages of samadhi. Starting tomorrow morning in the morning instructions, I'm going to start to bring in now, the last 2, yesterday and this morning, it was about working with mindfulness of breathing, just staying with the breath, and then today about how we can bring breathing in to meet other experiences. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to start to say some things about what do we do when the samadhi starts to happen? How do we start to consciously incorporate that and work with that in the meditation? That'll be in the instructions. And we'll just do a little step by step as far as we can get in the 5 days here. And I realize I'm going to say this again tomorrow, but not everybody will have these experiences happening. Some people will still be wondering, still trying to just get their mind to settle a little bit. Some people will be having these samadhi experiences, but I'm going to keep the instructions moving just because so at least people have heard it, even though it may not be exactly what's needed for what's happening with them in that moment. But let me just offer a couple of general things here that won't be so detailed. I'll give more details, will be in the morning. This sounds kind of silly, but as you move through samadhi, the way to do it is, well, there are 2 ways. You either do something or you do nothing. And what I mean by that is the doing nothing part is if you just stay with your breathing, it can, for many people, that's all they do. They just stay with it, and the samadhi builds and builds and builds, and it just grows, and you're just in it more, and just the way is clear. You're doing something, the meditation, but you're not consciously cultivating the samadhi states. So that's, again, I realize I'm just naming these. I realize don't worry about the detail. Again, let me know if you want to talk one-on-one, or we'll get into the instructions in the morning. So that's the kind of the doing nothing. You just keep staying with your breath and let it unfold. Another way is in the doing something is, and of the doing something, you can kind of break that into two parts. One is that there can be, as say it starts to feel blissful and good, you can purposely incline your mind, just like if for those of you, if you were doing this Brahma Vihara metta practice earlier, there's this idea that if the metta comes and we feel it, we can kind of incline our mind to more soak in it or absorb in it or go in it or feel it more. We're using the mental to do it. You can do the same thing with the blissfulness, the pleasant, the light, whatever your expansiveness of samadhi. If it comes, then you may still stay with the breath, but we can actually incline our mind to more, put the mind over into the samadhi. And at some points, we may even feel it's not so much a doing, it's more of a letting go and letting it take us as it builds its own momentum. And so an example for that would be, it's like an image of if you want to roll a snowball down a hill, you have to put in a lot of work in the beginning to pack the snowball and get it ready. And then you have to put in effort to kind of start rolling it and pushing it. But the idea is if it picks up enough, it gets bigger and bigger as it picks up more snow, and it's got its own weight and momentum, and it kind of starts to roll more on its own, and you're giving it a lighter and lighter touch. And then you don't want to keep pushing, you just want to let go, and its own momentum takes it. And so there can be a feeling of the goodness of samadhi. We want to let go into it. So again, you don't have to remember, I'm just naming some things here. This is the instructions, we'll really slow down on all this. But I just wanted you to hear that you can just stay with your breath, don't do anything. You can do something inclining your mind towards and to connect with and let go into the deeper states. Another thing you can do is, instead of inclining a mind, it's looking backwards and letting go more of, instead of letting go into, it's letting go of the grosser states that are kind of sort of behind you a little bit. And I can't get into saying that, but that's just another flavor that you'll hear of how we work with it. That's why it can be useful to work with a teacher, if you find it useful as these things start to happen. You would figure it out on your own. It's not like you have to have someone, but sometimes people who've been through it can point out, oh, try letting go into this, or cultivating this, or shifting in this way can be helpful. So there's a range of ways to sort of move through samadhi and the jhanas. But anyway, what do you do when you're in deeper samadhi? Forget jhana, just any stages of samadhi. Well, it's kind of like what I just said, and I'm not trying to be cute or anything, but you can do something or you can do nothing. And what I mean by that is just being with your breath, being in these states of samadhi, and just continue just practicing in that way and just having the experience. You don't actually have to do anything except just go into these meditative states. There is a process that doesn't get talked about, I don't think, that much. It's called Purification of Mind. And it's basically talking about that one of the powers of samadhi is that I say it kind of ripens us, it marinates us, it kind of cooks is a little strong of a word, but it kind of cooks us, but in a good way, not in a bad way. We get ripened, matures us, if a way, just by being in these states has a power to rewire certain conditioned patterns, neural pathways, just by touching samadhi over time. And so getting into this idea of what leads to enlightenment and liberation, as we'll discuss tomorrow and the next day, about the path of insight meditation. The idea is you're supposed to have these insights, and that's what gets you liberated. But a lot of people don't have an experience like that. A lot of people find just by touching the samadhi, and equanimity and a non-reactivity carries through in life that builds and grows. That's a fruit of just coming out of the samadhi. And right there, we're into the stream of non-clinging, and our hearts tend to naturally be more open. And you weren't necessarily thinking that you were doing something called insight practice. Maybe that gets pulled in too, but just by itself, the samadhi has a ability to kind of liberate the mind in itself, right? And if you've ever even been on retreats, you might know the experience of you sit and you walk around in an effortless way of even between the sits, like you kind of are deep in this place of awareness. And not that you can't get reactive at all, but I mean, even on retreats, of course, that can happen, but it's way stronger and clearer. So this starts to carry through more and more into life. And actually, a number of people, I'm not making any grand claim here, but know that the distinction between sitting meditation and the rest of daily life starts to dissolve more as it carries through more and more. So that's this purification of mind benefit. You don't have to do anything, just go into samadhi, but just sit and have your practice. And there's other things that's the sort of not doing anything part. You just let it work you. You can also, so we'll have those times, but we'll also have times when we use what we have, the clarity of mind, more, I would say more leaning on the insight side of the practice. Something's going on. It comes up. We want to investigate. We want to bring our awareness to it. We want to, it may not be verbal, it may be a feeling into, wow, what's this fear? What's this anxiety? What's this contractedness? The power of mind, you're able to, they use this term, penetrate the experience so much more powerfully because of having it, the electron microscope or Hubble telescope of the mind. And so that's another thing. And we'll know when's the time just to be in the meditative state. We choose. When's the time then something's up and we have this power and we're able to connect more deeply and clearly and see our suffering and what's its cause. That's when we can use the samadhi. And then another thing we can do is just do things I kind of just didn't get into much detail about, use the time to just keep deepening the meditative states, to keep building a more powerful telescope or electron microscope. And these are the things when you're deep in samadhi, what do you do to go to other more stages? And you may or may not wish to do that. So there's a lot of choices on how you move through samadhi. It's not just one way because we're all individual. And again, you can't mess it up. It's just, you just work the best you can. And then as these stages deepen, there's a lot of ways we can use it either on its own or bringing the samadhi in with other flavors of practice that we might call insight meditation, and even when we're doing these Brahma Vihara practice of the heart, oftentimes people will find that when they get into deeper samadhi, the heart is just opening. That can happen. And in fact, later at the end of this week, I'm going to talk about that in particular. I'm sort of giving away I think what we'll do on Friday for the Brahma Viharas, let the feeling of samadhi be the metta kind of a thing. It can feel like that. And so it can not only naturally open the heart, but when we want to turn the mind towards cultivating samadhi, if it's not naturally opening, because the power of the mind has been cultivated so well, we're much more able to, not in a way that's fake, but in a genuine way, bring up these beautiful states of the mind and the heart, because the mind's so malleable and we're so familiar with using it. So there's a lot of powers that come from samadhi. So let's just leave it at that. I think that's good for today. And I'll remind you as we get into the insight side, just this main thing about inclusive and exclusive samadhi, because that's important to know if we talk about insight meditation, the different flavors and how they might affect what goes on in the insight side of the practice. So thank you for your kind attention. And I will, let's sit quietly for maybe just a few breaths, and then I will ring the bell to end.